Can I sit with you, Ma?
Yes, sure, you can join me.
The night Seo Jun walked into her restaurant, Jai-ho dropped a spoon. She would think about that later, about how the body knows things before the mind catches up. How her hands, steady through 6-hour shifts and difficult customers, and the particular exhaustion of a woman running a restaurant alone, chose that exact moment to betray her. One spoon. One sharp ring of metal on tile. 12 men in dark suits didn't even blink. They had already stopped breathing the moment he walked through the door. She retrieved the spoon, kept moving. She was 23 years old, carrying 4 plates and a mental calculation about whether she could afford this month's medication order without dipping into the emergency account. And she had absolutely no business noticing the man who had just occupied the corner booth with the quiet authority of someone who had never in his life needed to announce himself. She noticed him anyway. He was tall in the precise way, not performed, not loud, just exact. His suit was charcoal. His face was still. Not cold, not cruel, simply absent of every small social performance that other men wore constantly. The smile that said *I am harmless. The shifting eyes that said *I am watching. The restless hands that said *I am uncertain. He had none of that. He sat and he looked at the room once slowly, and the room rearranged itself accordingly. His eyes landed on her for exactly 1 second. She felt it like a change in air pressure. She moved to the opposite side of the restaurant and stayed there for 40 minutes. She told herself the warmth in her face was kitchen heat. She told herself she was tired. She served 4 tables, refilled 3 water glasses, told a couple at table 9 that the Galbi J-Gym had a 40-minute wait, and watched them decide it was worth it. She did not look at the corner booth. At exactly 40 minutes, Min-soo appeared at her elbow. Min-soo, who had worked the floor for 11 years and had the unshakable composure of a man who had seen everything, was currently wearing the expression of someone being asked to carry something very heavy across a very narrow bridge. "Table 7, he said. "They're asking for you specifically." "I don't have table 7. "You do now." He was already walking away. He asked for the waitress who dropped the spoon. She crossed the restaurant with a notepad she didn't need. Up close, he was even more still. The kind of stillness that isn't emptiness but compression. A vast amount of something pressed into a very controlled space. 2 men sat across from him. Both went carefully, deliberately blank when Jai-ho approached, the way people go blank around the thing they're most afraid of acknowledging. "I've never eaten here before," he said. His voice was low. It arrived in the air and stayed there without dissipating, the way certain sounds do in certain rooms. "What do you recommend?" Jai-ho held his gaze. "The Galbi J-Gym. My grandfather built the recipe over 30 years. Nobody in this kitchen touches it." Something shifted in his expression, barely perceptible, like a door opening 1 centimeter in a wall you hadn't realized had doors. "Your grandfather," he said. "He passed it to my mother. She passed it to the kitchen." She didn't know why she said that. She never talked about her mother to customers. "Bring me that," he said, "and whatever should come before it, your judgment." She wrote nothing on the notepad. She walked back to the kitchen. She pressed her back against the cold steel door and stood there for exactly 5 seconds. Then she plated the appetizers and carried them out and did not look at him once for the rest of the service. He left at 10:15. The tip he left made Min-soo go very still for a long moment before folding the notes with extreme care and placing them in the envelope. 3 black cars waited outside. They left in convoy, unhurried, the way powerful things move when they have nowhere to be afraid of. Jai-ho stayed to mop the floors. She always did, not because it was her job exactly, but because the restaurant was the last thing that smelled like her mother before the illness had taken most of the warmth out of her, and she wasn't ready most nights to go upstairs to the apartment and sit with the medication bottles and the quiet and the particular grief of watching someone diminish slowly. She moved the chairs, dragged the bucket, rolled her sleeves the way her mother used to when Jai-ho was small and watching from the kitchen doorway, learning the geometry of work from a woman who never once made it look like anything other than dignity. That was when she found the card on table 7. White, plain, no name, no number, 4 words in clean, precise type. The loan is cancelled. Jai-ho read it twice, turned it over, blank. The loan? Her mother had borrowed against the restaurant twice before the private lender, the one whose name their accountant refused to say aloud, because saying it meant acknowledging what kind of money it was. 380 million won, the number that didn't negotiate, the kind that sent people on Sundays. Cancelled. She sat down at table 7 in her empty restaurant with the mop handle still in her hand and looked at 4 words until her eyes burned. She didn't feel relief. She felt the cold, specific fear of something that costs nothing, because in her experience, nothing that costs nothing ever actually costs nothing. She was still sitting there when her phone rang. 12:47, unknown number. She answered, because she understood that not answering would not make it go away. Miss Park, his voice, immediate and unhurried. I apologize for the hour, I won't keep you long. A pause measured to the second. There are things about your family's situation you should know, things your mother chose not to tell you. Another pause. I'd like to meet tomorrow morning, somewhere you feel safe, you choose. Who are you? Jai-ho asked, steadier than she felt. The silence lasted 3 seconds. When he spoke again, there was something underneath the words, not regret, but its shadow. The shape of something that had been carried for a long time. Someone who should have found you much sooner, he said. The call ended. Jai-ho set the phone down. The restaurant was silent around her. She looked at the framed photograph on the wall behind the counter, her mother young and laughing on opening day, holding a baby wrapped in white, the restaurant bright and new behind her. She had looked at that photograph 10,000 times. She looked at it now with new eyes. And she saw him, at the edge of the frame, half cut away as if someone had considered removing him and thought better of it. Young, dark suit, the same absolute stillness worn 30 years earlier on a face she had looked at across a table 40 minutes ago. Her hand found the wall. The photograph was 30 years old. She didn't sleep. Jai-ho sat at the kitchen table until the sky outside shifted from black to the colorless gray that precedes dawn, the photograph flat on the wood in front of her. She had taken it off the wall. She hadn't meant to, her hands had done it before her mind caught up, the same way her hands had dropped a spoon 6 hours earlier in a restaurant full of men who had stopped breathing. She looked at the photograph until the faces stopped being faces and started being information. Her mother, 20 years old, laughing with her whole body, the kind of laugh that doesn't know anyone is watching. The baby in white. The restaurant behind them, new and bright, her grandfather's handwriting visible on the sign above the door. And at the edge of the frame, half swallowed by the border, as if the person who had printed this photograph had pressed the crop line deliberately close, and then, at the last moment, pulled back a man. Young, dark suit even then. Standing with the particular stillness of someone who has learned very early that stillness is its own kind of power. 30 years younger, the same face. She had looked at this photograph 10,000 times in her life, on bad days, on her birthday, on the days her mother's pain was bad, and Jai-ho needed to remember that her mother had once laughed like that, open and complete and unguarded. 10,000 times, and she had never seen him, because she had never known to look. At 6 a.m., she typed a message to the unknown number. Café Murray, 8 a.m. back table. She chose it because she had worked there through university and knew the owner and knew the exits and knew that the back table had clean sightlines to the front door, the side entrance, and the kitchen pass. She chose it because she was, apparently, now the kind of person who needed to know where the exits were. The response arrived in under a minute. I'll be there. He arrived at 7:58. Jai-ho was already seated with tea she hadn't touched. Watching the door. He came through it the same way he had entered her restaurant the night before, no announcement, no performance, just the immediate reorganization of the room around a new gravitational center. 2 men at the counter looked up. Both found somewhere else to look within seconds. He sat across from her without asking if the chair was available. He didn't order. He folded his hands on the table and looked at her with the direct, undecorated attention of a man who has decided that what comes next will be said plainly. "My name is Seo-jun," he said. "I run a private investment firm, among other things." "Among other things," Jae-ho repeated. He didn't flinch. "Yes." She placed the photograph on the table between them. She had brought it in an envelope, handled it with both hands on the stairs, as if its fragility now was something she had become responsible for. She watched his face when he looked at it. He didn't look surprised. He had known the photograph existed. What moved across his face was something older and slower than surprise. The involuntary recognition of a man looking at a version of himself that no longer exists, at a moment that divided his life cleanly into before and after, at evidence of a decision that had cost more than he had known how to calculate at the time. "She never told you," he said, not a question. "She told me nothing." Jae-ho kept her voice even. "She said he left before I was born, that there was nothing to know. She said it so many times it stopped feeling like a lie." A pause. "Who are you to her?" Seo-jun was quiet for 4 seconds. She counted them. "I was the man who was supposed to protect her," he said, "and I failed." "That's a confession, not an answer." "Yes," he looked at her steadily. "They're the same thing." He told her then, not in the evasive, self-protective way of men who recount their failures while quietly repositioning themselves as victims of circumstance. He told her plainly, without softening the parts that reflected badly on him, which told her more about him than the content of what he said. He and her mother had met when she was 20. His family and hers had a business arrangement, the kind that, in the world he came from, carried the weight of law. They were together for 2 years. She was, he said, and stopped, and the pause was the most human thing she had seen from him. She was the only person who made that world feel worth inhabiting. He had made enemies. He had been making them for years, building his organization with the focused ambition of a young man who believed that power, accumulated carefully enough, would eventually become safety. He had been wrong about one thing. He had believed he could keep the people he loved separate from what he was building. That 2 worlds, managed with sufficient discipline, would not touch. They touched. Men came for him through her mother. The only way to keep her safe, the only way that worked, the only architecture of protection available to him at the time, was to make them believe she meant nothing. He cut every connection. He did it publicly, completely, with enough visible finality that the people watching him were satisfied. He didn't know she was pregnant. "I found out 8 months later," he said, "through my own intelligence network. A former associate had relocated to Busan with a newborn." Something moved in his jaw. By then the situation had worsened. Approaching her, approaching either of you, would have been a sentence, for all 3 of us. A pause. "So I watched from a distance," I told myself was protection. Jae-ho looked at the photograph, at her mother's laugh, at the baby who would spend 23 years being told there was nothing to know. "She knew you were alive," Jae-ho said. "Yes." "She knew where you were." "Yes." "She chose not to tell me." "She was protecting you, the same logic I used, the same mistake, keeping distance and calling it safety." His voice was quiet. "It runs in the decisions we make for the people we love." Jae-ho looked at him, at the face that was both a stranger's and, in some quality she was only beginning to locate, deeply and disorienting familiar, the way a word in a foreign language sometimes sounds like something you already know. "Things changed," she said. "You said the danger is gone. The organization that threatened your mother fractured 4 years ago. The men who made distance necessary are either dead or irrelevant." He held her gaze. "Which is when I started looking for you." "How long?" 3 years. 3 years. While Jae-ho had been calculating grocery money and measuring medication, and not asking about her father because the answer was always nothing to know, he had been looking. "Why did it take 3 years?" "Finding you was the easy part." His voice was very quiet. "Knowing what to say when I did, that took longer." The cafe moved around them. Steam, morning light, the low murmur of ordinary people in ordinary conversations. Jae-ho wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at this man, This careful, dangerous, 30-year absence sitting across a small table asking her, without quite saying it, for something she had no framework yet for giving. "There's something else," he said. She waited. He reached into his coat, set an envelope on the table, thick, sealed. "The man who owns your mother's debt," he said. "The private lender, the name your accountant wouldn't say aloud." A pause. "His name is Kwon D-sung. He worked inside my organization for 11 years. 4 years ago, he attempted to steal from me. He failed. He was removed." The word carried weight she didn't ask him to unpack. "I believed he had disappeared. I was wrong. He came back quietly, and he found your mother, and he has been building a structure around your family for 18 months. Jae-ho's hands stilled on the cup. "He knew I was looking for you," Seo-jun said. "He waited. He knew that when I finally made contact, I would do something visible, cancel the loan, cancel the debt, make a gesture that confirmed you mattered to me." His expression didn't change. "Last night, I did exactly that, which means the card I left on table 7 did 2 things simultaneously. It protected you." A pause. "And it confirmed to Kwon that he had found the right person." The warmth of the cafe had stopped reaching her. She was sitting in it and not feeling it. "You made me a target," she said. "Before I knew your name, before I knew any of it." Her voice was level. "You confirmed to a dangerous man that I exist and that I matter, and you did it before you ever sat across from me and told me the truth." Seo-jun said nothing. Because there was nothing to say. Because it was true, and he was not the kind of man who dressed truth in justification. The silence between them had weight and texture, and the quality of a moment in which a person decides, in real time, who they are going to be from this point forward. Jae-ho looked at the photograph one last time, at her mother's laugh, at the man at the edge of the frame who had been the center of a silence that had lasted 23 years. She looked up. "Tell me everything," she said. Her voice was quiet and precise and entirely without performance. "Not the version you've decided I can handle, not the version that makes your decisions look like the only available options." She held his gaze without blinking. "Everything." Seo-jun studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, deep and involuntary. The recognition of a man seeing something familiar in a face he is only beginning to learn to read. He reached into his coat, set a second envelope on the table, thicker than the first. "Then you should know," he said, "that Kwon D-sung has been in contact with your mother for 6 weeks." A pause. "And that she hasn't told you." Jae-ho's hand went still above the envelope. Outside the cafe, the morning continued its ordinary business. Indifferent, unhurried, entirely unaware of what was sitting sealed on a back table, waiting to be opened, waiting to change the shape of everything that came after. Jae-ho opened the envelope, with both hands flat on the table. She did it slowly, not from hesitation, from the deliberate discipline of a woman who has learned that the difference between panic and composure is often just the speed at which you move. Slow hands, steady breath. Whatever was inside this envelope was already true whether she opened it quickly or carefully. The truth didn't change with the speed of her hands. The first page was a phone record. Her mother's number printed at the top. 17 exchanges over 6 weeks. Outgoing and incoming, always between 10 and 11 at night, always after Jae-ho was either at the restaurant or in bed. The calls were short, never longer than 4 minutes, long enough to receive instructions. Short enough to leave no room for resistance. The second page was a property document. The restaurant, her grandfather's restaurant, the galbi jjim recipe, the photograph on the wall, the napkins folded into precise points that nobody noticed. Transferred 6 months ago to D-sung Capital Holdings as collateral against the loan extension. Jae-ho had known about this. Her mother had told her. A temporary arrangement, she'd said. A private investor. Hands off. Nothing will change. She looked at the name on the ownership line. D-sung Capital Holdings. She looked at the next page. Another property document. The apartment above the restaurant. Separately assessed, separately transferred 3 months ago. Jae-ho had not known about this one. Her mother had not told her about this one. She set the pages down. "He owns the building," she said. He owns the restaurant, the apartment, the debt, and the lease. Seo Jun's voice was even. He has been constructing this position for 18 months through 3 separate shell companies. Each transfer was legal on its face. By the time I identified the full pattern, the structure was already complete. What does he want? Me, no elaboration, no softening. Specifically, the financial routing infrastructure I have spent 20 years building. 12 countries, completely untraceable. If Kwon can move his operations through that network, he becomes unreachable. No transaction can be followed. No authority can touch him. A pause. He built a cage around your family, and he's waiting to see if I'll pay his price to open it. Jai-ho looked at the documents spread across the cafe table. At the phone records, 17 calls her mother had made and received in the dark, after Jai-ho was asleep, carrying alone the weight of knowing what she was dealing with. She thought about her mother this morning, sitting at the kitchen table, fully dressed, hands around a cold cup, watching the door. She had known Jai-ho was coming home, with something she wasn't supposed to know. He told her, Jai-ho said. Kwon, he told her who he was. 6 weeks ago, in person. He sat at a table in the restaurant during service and he told her everything, who he was, what he wanted, what would happen if she contacted me or told you. Seo Jun's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He told her he had people watching, that any deviation from her normal routine would be noticed, that her medical treatment, the pre-authorizations, the guarantor paperwork, all of it ran through Desong Capital, through him. Jai-ho understood the precise architecture of that. Her mother's treatment wasn't a luxury that could be delayed or rescheduled. It was a Tuesday. It was a clinic that required guarantor approval before each infusion cycle. It was a structure Kwon had built not to threaten with loudly, but to hold quietly. A hand around a throat that didn't squeeze, just rested there, just made itself known. He didn't need to threaten her, Jai-ho said. She already understood what he could do. Yes, a frightened woman protecting her daughter is easier to manage than a woman with nothing left to lose. He understood that. Something moved in Seo Jun's expression, controlled, compressed, but present. He is very good at identifying pressure points. He spent 11 years learning them inside my organization. Jai-ho gathered the pages, straightened them, put them back in the envelope with the same deliberate slowness with which she had removed them. She's been carrying this for 6 weeks, she said. Yes. Alone. Yes. Jai-ho looked at the table, at the space where the pages had been. She thought about her mother measuring out medication at midnight, about the way the quiet had been different lately, not the quiet of illness, which Jai-ho knew by texture and weight, but a tighter quiet, a held quiet, the quiet of a woman maintaining a performance for an audience she couldn't name. She had thought it was the illness progressing. It wasn't the illness. What's the plan? Jai-ho said. Not a question. A request for information she needed in order to decide what to do next. Seo Jun reached into his coat again, set the black phone on the table. One number saved in it. Mine. If anything changes, anyone unfamiliar near the restaurant, near the building, any contact from anyone asking about finances or your mother's health, you call immediately. That's reactive, Jai-ho said. That's waiting for something to go wrong. The actual plan requires time, he said. And it requires Kwon to believe nothing has changed. He needs to believe you and I have not spoken. That the loan cancellation last night was a routine business decision with no personal dimension. That you are exactly what you appear, an ordinary woman running a restaurant, unaware and uninvolved. You want me to pretend? I want you to go home, he said. Look at your mother the way you always look at her. Go to work. Run the evening service. Do not confront her, do not change your routine, do not give Kwon's people, and there will be people watching any indication that this morning was anything other than an ordinary morning. Jai-ho looked at him, and while I'm doing that, I will be dismantling every structure he built around your family. His voice was quiet, absolute, the voice of a man stating something already decided, not proposed, not negotiated, simply true. The shell companies, the fraudulent incorporation documents, the property transfers, piece by piece, legally where possible. A pause. Otherwise where necessary. Jai-ho understood the shape of asterisk otherwise, without needing its details. She filed it in the category of truths she accepted without requiring their full architecture. "There's something you're not telling me," she said. He was still. "Kwon knew you were looking for me," she said. "You said that. He knew months in advance, enough time to build an 18-month structure, which means someone told him." She held his gaze. "Someone inside your organization knew you were searching for your daughter and passed that information to a man who used it to build a trap." She paused. "You have a problem that isn't just Kwon D-sung." The silence lasted 4 seconds. "I know," he said. "Do you know who?" "I have a name." His voice was measured, controlled in the way that things are controlled when the alternative is something the room cannot contain. "I've had it for 9 days." "And you haven't moved on it." Moving on it prematurely alerts Kwon. He needs to believe his source is still operational, that he still has eyes inside my organization. The moment that changes, he accelerates. He stops being patient. A pause. And a patient Kwon D-sung is dangerous. An impatient one is catastrophic. Jai-ho absorbed this. The layered precision of it, the way one decision created pressure on every other decision, the way a man like Kwon had constructed the situation so that every available response carried a cost. She thought about chess, which her grandfather had taught her, which she had never liked because she found the endgame depressing, the slow, inevitable narrowing of available moves until there was only one left. "When does your window open?" she asked. Something shifted in his expression. That same fractional recalibration, a man adjusting his assessment in real time. "Friday evening," he said. "Kwon moves money on Fridays. The shell company structure relies on a routing sequence that my people can intercept, not the funds themselves, but the documentation infrastructure. The fraudulent incorporation filings. If we can expose those, the property transfers are void. The debt is unenforceable." A pause. "Your mother walks away clean." "Today is Wednesday," Jai-ho said. "Yes." 2 days. "Yes." Jai-ho looked at the black phone on the table. Small, unremarkable. The kind of object that looked like nothing and was, in this moment, the most important thing in the room. "There's one more thing," Seo-jun said. She waited. "Kwon will make contact before Friday. He won't wait passively, he'll want to take your measure. See what you know, how you carry it, whether you've been compromised." His eyes were steady on hers. "He'll come to the restaurant, probably tomorrow. He'll be pleasant, courteous even. He'll bring something, a gesture, an offer, something that looks like goodwill and functions as a test." "What kind of test?" "He'll want to know if you're afraid of him." Seo-jun paused. "And he'll want to know if you're already mine." Jai-ho looked at the photograph one last time. At her mother's laugh, young and unguarded. At the man at the edge of the frame who had spent 30 years being the silence at the center of every question she'd never been allowed to ask. She put the photograph in her bag, picked up the black phone, stood. "When he comes," she said, "what do I do?" Seo-jun looked up at her. "Be exactly who you've always been," he said. "A woman who picks up the spoon and keeps moving." Jai-ho held his gaze for 1 moment. Then she walked to the door and out into the ordinary morning. Cold air, street noise, the city moving through itself with complete indifference to the size of what she was carrying. She did not know, as she turned the corner, that a black car parked 40 meters behind her had been there since 7:30, or that the man inside it was already composing a message to someone whose name she now knew. She met with him 90 minutes. She took something he gave her, the hook is set. On the other end of that message, in an office on the 14th floor of a building she had walked past 100 times without knowing what it contained, Kwon D-sung read the update. Set his phone down. Looked out at the city with the calm, proprietorial expression of a man whose trap is closing exactly as designed. He picked up his tea. He was a patient man. He could wait 1 more day. Jai-ho walked through the front door of the apartment, and her mother was already awake. That was the first wrong thing. Her mother never woke before 9. The illness had made mornings a negotiation, the body slow to come back online, the medication schedule requiring food before the first dose, the fatigue that accumulated overnight like water in a low place. 9 o'clock on a good day, later on the bad ones. Jai-ho had built her entire morning routine around this, quiet movements, no radio, coffee made without the grinder so the apartment stayed silent until her mother was ready for sound. It was 9:08. Her mother was sitting at the kitchen table fully dressed, both hands around a cup of tea that had gone completely cold, watching the door with the expression of a woman who had been listening for footsteps on the stairs for a very long time. They looked at each other across the kitchen. Jai-ho thought about what Seo-jun had said. Go home. Look at her the way you always look at her. Don't change anything. She had walked the 20 minutes from the cafe rehearsing ordinary, rehearsing the face of a woman who had slept badly and started early and had nothing new behind her eyes. She looked at her mother's face and understood that ordinary was not going to survive this room. Because her mother was wearing the same expression Jai-ho had spent 90 minutes sitting across from in a cafe. The expression of a person who has been carrying something at the absolute limit of their capacity and has finally, in the presence of the one person they cannot perform for, run out of the strength to keep carrying it alone. You were out early, her mother said. I couldn't sleep. Where did you go? Cafe Murray. The silence that followed had texture. Her mother looked down at her cold cup. The kitchen held itself very still around them, the particular stillness of a room in which two people are waiting for the other to speak first, and both know it, and both keep waiting anyway. Jai-ho sat down. She did not ask the question. She waited. After a long moment, her mother said, How long have you known? Jai-ho thought about lying. 3 full seconds of genuine consideration, not to deceive but to protect, the same instinct her mother had been operating on for 23 years, the same logic that had produced this exact kitchen and this exact silence, and these two women sitting across a table from each other carrying the accumulated weight of a truth that had been deferred so many times it had almost become permanent. Since last night, she said, there was a card on table 7 and a photograph. Her mother closed her eyes. Not in distress. In something quieter than distress, the specific release of a woman who has been braced for an impact for so long that, when it finally arrives, the dominant feeling is not pain, but the exhausted relief of no longer having to brace. I wanted to tell you, her mother said, so many times. I know. I thought if you didn't know, you couldn't be. I know. Jai-ho's voice was gentle. She reached across the table and covered her mother's hands with hers. I understand why you did it, all of it. She held her mother's gaze. But I need you to tell me about Kwon Di-sung. Her mother's hands went completely still beneath Jai-ho's. The name landed exactly as Jai-ho had expected, not with shock, but with the flinch of a word that has been dreaded for weeks. That has been circling every quiet evening, every careful goodnight, every 10 to 11 phone call made in the dark, while a daughter slept 2 rooms away. He told you, her mother said. He told me enough. I need to hear the rest from you. Her mother was quiet for a long time. Outside the kitchen window, the city moved through its morning, a delivery truck revering, children from the school up the street, the corner vendor arranging his cart. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life. 2 floors above a restaurant that no longer had their name on the deed. He came 10 months ago, her mother said. I thought he was exactly what he presented himself as, a private investment firm. The terms were aggressive, but the alternative was, she stopped. The alternative was stopping treatment, so I signed. When did you find out who he was? 6 weeks ago. Her mother's voice was steady in the way that things are steady when they have been rehearsed, when the steadiness is a daily practice rather than a natural state. He came to the restaurant during service. He sat at table 4 and he waited until you were in the kitchen and then he told me. A pause. He knew everything, your father's name, what your father was, what he was building. He told me he had been watching our family for over a year. That the loan, the property transfers, all of it was deliberate. Her hands turned over beneath Jai-ho's and gripped back. He said if I told you, if I changed anything, if I made any attempt to contact your father, he would know. and the next treatment cycle would not be authorized. Jai-ho thought about Tuesday, about an infusion clinic that required guarantor pre-authorization, about the quiet, architectural precision of a man who didn't need to raise his voice because he had built his threat into the infrastructure of her mother's survival. He wanted you afraid and isolated, Jai-ho said. He wanted me manageable, her mother said. The word came out with a quiet fury that Jai-ho had not heard from her mother in years, not since the early days of the diagnosis, when anger had still felt available before exhaustion claimed the space where it lived. He was very good at it. He won't be after Friday, Jai-ho said. Her mother looked at her. I can't tell you everything yet, Jai-ho said. I need you to trust that it's being handled. I need you to keep your routine, every part of it, for 2 more days. She held her mother's gaze. Can you do that? Her mother studied her for a long moment. Then she said quietly, You sound like him. Jai-ho didn't answer. She didn't have an answer that wouldn't cost her something she needed to keep. He's a good man, her mother said, inside a world that makes goodness very expensive. A pause. Be careful with how much you trust him. I trust that he has more to lose than I do if something happens to me, Jai-ho said. Right now that's enough. Her mother nodded slowly, let go of her hands. Jai-ho stood. Don't answer the door if anyone knocks. Don't make any calls you don't have to make. She paused at the kitchen doorway. And Iyama. Her mother looked up. Whatever you did, whatever you decided, I know why you did it. Jai-ho held her gaze. I'm not angry. Her mother pressed her lips together, nodded once. Jai-ho went downstairs and opened the restaurant. She moved through the prep routine with deliberate normalcy, restocking the side station, reviewing reservations, checking the walk-in temperature, tasting the soup base, placing the napkins into precise points the way her grandfather had taught her. She did not look at the street. She did not check the black phone. At 12:30, the lunch service began. Ordinary, unremarkable. A table of office workers, a pair of regulars, a young couple who studied the menu for 10 minutes and ordered what they always ordered. At 1:15, a man she had never seen walked through the front door. He was in his 50s, well-dressed without being conspicuous, the specific aesthetic of a man who has learned that visible wealth attracts the wrong kind of attention. He moved through the restaurant with the unhurried ease of someone who has never once been made to wait for anything, and he sat at table 4, the small one near the window, the one her mother had named without knowing, and he did not pick up a menu. He looked at Jai-ho. Not with aggression, not with theater, with the patient, proprietary attention of a man surveying something he already owns and is simply confirming its condition. Jai-ho served a table, cleared another, moved through her section with steady hands and a composed face, and her heart beating at precisely twice its normal speed. At 1:31, Min-soo appeared at her elbow. His voice was very quiet. Table 4 is asking for you. She went. She stood at the edge of the table and looked at him directly. She did not wait for him to speak first. Can I get you something? She said. Kwon Di-sung looked up at her with a smile of complete, genuine warmth. The kind of smile that reached the eyes. The kind that, on a different face in a different room, would have meant something uncomplicated. Miss Park Jai-ho, he said, please sit down. I'm working. I know, he gestured to the chair across from him. Sit anyway. She sat, because running would tell him the size of what she knew. Because composure was the only currency she had in this moment, and she was not spending it. You had an early morning, he said pleasantly. I couldn't sleep. Café Murray. He said it the way you say the name of a place you have already visited, already assessed, already filed. Quiet place. You went alone. Always. He smiled again, complete, unhurried. The smile of a man who has just received an answer he already knew was false and is choosing, for now, to accept it, because accepting it costs him nothing and tells him everything. He reached into his jacket, set a slim, white envelope on the table between them. For your mother's next treatment cycle, he said. His voice was warm. genuinely warm, which was the most frightening thing about it. A gesture of goodwill. We want to make sure her care continues without disruption. Jai-ho looked at the envelope. Her next infusion is Tuesday, he said, conversationally, pleasantly, the way a man mentions the weather. The clinic requires guarantor pre-authorization by Monday at noon. These things have such tight administrative windows, don't they? He sipped his tea. Paperwork delays can be so disruptive to treatment schedules. So much unnecessary stress for a family already managing so much. There it was. Not a raised voice. Not a hand on her arm. Not a single word that would sound like a threat repeated to anyone who hadn't been sitting at this table, in this restaurant, watching this man hold a cup of tea and mention a Tuesday with the calm precision of someone tightening a single screw. Jai-ho picked up the envelope. She stood. "I'll make sure my mother looks at this tonight," she said. Her voice was a waitress's voice, clean and even and completely empty of everything she was feeling. "Thank you for coming in." Kwon Di-sung looked up at her. He held her gaze for 3 seconds longer than necessary, long enough to make the point, short enough to maintain the pleasantness. "Give her my warmest regards," he said. Jai-ho walked to the kitchen. She pushed through the door. She pressed her back against the cold steel and stood very still in the noise and heat of the kitchen and allowed herself exactly 4 seconds. Then she pulled out the black phone. "He's here, table 4. He mentioned Tuesday. He knows about the infusion." The response came in 7 seconds. "I know, Tuesday is already handled. Do not react. Get the envelope photographed. There's a woman at table 9, dark coat, book. She's mine. Office. 2 minutes apart, trust me." Jai-ho read it once. Put the phone away. Picked up 2 plates. Walked back out into the dining room. Steady hands, composed face. The specific grace of a woman who has learned that the difference between panic and composure is just the speed at which she moves. Slow. Deliberate. Giving him absolutely nothing. Kwon Di-sung left at 2:11. Jai-ho watched him go from the side station. He rose without hurry, buttoned his coat at the table rather than the door, the small, deliberate gesture of a man who is never cold, who has never needed to rush toward warmth, and walked through the restaurant with the same unhurried ease with which he had entered it. At the door he paused, turned, found her across the room with the precision of a man who always knows exactly where the thing he owns is standing. He nodded once, pleasant, final. Then he was gone. The black car that collected him had been parked directly outside. No plates visible from the window. It pulled away smoothly, absorbed into traffic, and was gone in under 20 seconds. The envelope was still on table 4. Jai-ho had not touched it since she set it down. She cleared every surface around it, wiped the table, removed the cup, replaced the napkin, and left it sitting in the center of the clean tablecloth like something in quarantine. Min-soo looked at it once and then treated it the way you treat things that announce their own danger, by pretending it wasn't there. At 2:18, the black phone vibrated. "Leave the envelope exactly where it is. Don't close early. Don't change anything. I'll contact you at 6. Jai-ho read it, pocketed the phone, picked up an order pad and went back to work. The afternoon was the longest of her life. Not because anything happened, because nothing did. Because she smiled at customers and described specials and refilled water glasses and processed payments, and the entire time the envelope sat at table 4, and the woman at table 9 turned pages she wasn't reading, and somewhere in this city, a man named Kwon Di-sung was sitting in an office believing that everything was moving according to his design. The ordinary surface of things had never felt so expensive to maintain. At 4:30, her mother called. "Are you all right?" her mother asked. "I'm fine. He messaged me after he left. He said the visit went well." A pause waited with everything her mother wasn't saying, the guilt, the exhausted love of a woman watching the distance she had built to protect her daughter collapse in real time. "Jai-ho." "I handled it." A long silence. Then very quietly her mother said, "You sound exactly like him." Jai-ho didn't answer that. She pressed the phone against her ear and looked at the restaurant, at the tables, at the photograph on the wall behind the counter, at the napkins folded into precise points that nobody noticed. At the room her grandfather had built and her mother had almost lost, and that currently, on paper, belonged to a man who had sat at table 4 and mentioned a Tuesday like it was nothing. "Lock the door tonight," Jai-ho said. "Don't open it for anyone. I'll be home after close." She hung up, went back to the floor. At 6 o'clock exactly, Seo-jun walked through the front door. Jai-ho had been expecting a call. She had not been expecting him in person, moving through the restaurant with that familiar economy of presence, the room recalibrating around him the way rooms do around a certain kind of man. 2 customers looked up. Both found somewhere else to look within seconds. Min-soo stepped back from the host stand without being asked, with the instinct of a man who has learned to read rooms. Seo-jun stopped at the service station where Jai-ho was standing. He kept his back to the dining room. His voice was very quiet. "The woman at table 9, has she moved?" Jai-ho glanced across the floor. Dark coat, book open, same position as 3 hours ago. "No." "Good, she got what she needed from the envelope. The contents have been photographed and filed with my legal team." A pause. "The document inside is a backdated co-directorship filing. Your mother listed as a director of Desong Capital. Signed, it creates legal liability, ties her to Kwon's organization on paper. Gives him insurance against everything I'm moving tonight." Jai-ho kept her face still. He was going to make her complicit. "Retroactively, yes. If my people expose his shell companies and he needs a defense, a signed co-directorship from your mother creates enough legal noise to delay proceedings for years, possibly permanently." His voice was even. "He left it with you instead of approaching her directly because he wanted to observe your response, whether you deliver it without questioning it, whether you already knew what it was." Another test. Everything he does is a test. He has been running them for 18 months. A brief pause. "He believes you passed. He believes you're an ordinary woman who picked up an envelope and will take it home to her mother tonight without understanding what's inside it." "And I'm going to confirm that belief," Jai-ho said. "Yes, you take it home. You tell your mother loudly, clearly, as if explaining to someone in the room that it looks like standard financial paperwork and she shouldn't sign anything without a lawyer's review. You use those words exactly." He held her gaze. "Can she hold that performance for one night?" Jai-ho thought about her mother, at the kitchen table. Fully dressed at 9 in the morning. Cold tea. 23 years of carrying a secret with the daily discipline of a woman who understood that falling apart was a luxury she had never once been able to afford. "Yes," she said. "Then tonight, while Kwon believes the document is moving toward your mother's signature, my people complete the intercept. The shell company infrastructure comes down. The fraudulent filings are exposed. The property transfers are reversed." His voice was quiet and absolute, the voice of a man closing an account that has been open for 4 years. By morning, he has no legal structure, no leverage, nothing enforceable. "And Kwon himself," Jai-ho said. "The structure being gone doesn't make him gone." Seo-jun looked at her steadily. "No," he said, "it doesn't." "So what does?" The silence that followed was 4 seconds long. In it, Jai-ho understood something she hadn't fully understood before, not from what he said, but from the precise quality of the silence itself. From the way a man looks when he is not deciding something, but has already decided it, and is simply allowing the space for the decision to be acknowledged. "He came for something I protect," Seo-jun said quietly. "Using methods I built the structures to prevent, through a person I failed to reach in time." A pause. "Men who do that don't receive a second opportunity." Jai-ho held his gaze. She didn't ask for the details. She didn't need the architecture of it, only the certainty, and the certainty was in every word he had not said. "There's one more thing," she said. He waited. "The source inside your organization, the one who told Kwon you were looking for me." She kept her voice even. "You said you've had a name for 9 days. Tonight, when Kwon's structure comes down, he'll know immediately that something moved. And the first thing he'll do is contact his source to find out what happened." Something shifted in Seo Jun's expression. Fractional. The recalibration of a man whose assessment has just been updated by something he didn't expect. Yes, he said. Which means tonight is also your window for the source. A pause. Yes. You were going to tell me that. I was going to tell you that after you were home, he said. After you were away from the restaurant and clear of anything that followed. His voice was measured. I didn't want you carrying more tonight than necessary. Jai-ho looked at him. At the face she was learning to read, the language of compression and restraint, of things expressed in the space between sentences. She thought about what her mother had said. He'll love you in ways that don't look like the word. You'll have to learn to read it. She was learning. I'm already carrying all of it, she said. Don't manage what I know, not anymore. Seo Jun held her gaze for a long moment. The source has been handled, he said, as of this afternoon. Jai-ho absorbed this, filed it in the category of necessary truths that didn't require their full architecture, moved forward. Is there anything else I need to know before tonight? One thing. He reached into his coat, placed a second small phone on the service station beside the first. Your mother's phone is compromised. Kwon has had access to her calls for 6 weeks. This is a clean line, give it to her tonight. Tell her to use only this until I confirm the intercept is complete. Jai-ho picked it up, put it in her apron pocket alongside the first. After tonight, she said, when this is over, what happens to us? The question arrived without planning. She hadn't meant to ask it here, in the middle of a service, standing at a station with 2 phones in her pocket and an envelope on table 4. But it was out now, and she didn't take it back, because she was done managing what she said to protect herself from answers she was afraid of. Seo Jun was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of avoidance. The quiet of a man selecting, with care, the precise truth rather than the comfortable approximation of it. I spent 30 years making decisions about your safety without asking you, he said. I'm not doing that again. His voice was very quiet. Whatever this becomes, whatever distance you need, whatever time, whatever form, I will not be the one who decides it for you. A pause. But I am not disappearing. That is the only thing I'm deciding unilaterally. Everything else is yours. Jai-ho looked at him. Okay, she said. She picked up the envelope from table 4. Walked to the back of the restaurant. At the office door she paused. Behind her, at table 9, a woman in a dark coat closed her book, stood, and began moving. Jai-ho stepped into the office, set the envelope on the desk, stood in the small, quiet room and listened to her own breathing and thought about her grandfather's restaurant, about a photograph at the edge of a frame, about a mother who had folded a secret into the shape of love and carried it for 23 years. About a man who had watched a woman pick up a spoon and keep moving and thought, I would very much like to not waste another day. The woman entered, worked without sound, repacked the envelope with precise, unhurried hands and was gone in 4 minutes and 9 seconds. Jai-ho walked back out. She finished her shift. She turned off the dining room lights. She picked up the envelope and her bag and her 2 phones and walked upstairs to her mother. Outside, 40 meters down the street, a black car sat in the dark with its engine running and its driver watching the building with the patient attention of a man who has been told to watch and wait. He had been told to report any deviation from the expected. He had nothing to report. Everything looked exactly as it should. Jai-ho walked upstairs with the envelope in her bag and 2 phones in her pocket and the specific stillness of a woman who has been performing ordinary for 8 hours and is not yet done. Her mother was in the kitchen. Same position as the morning, both hands around a cup, watching the door. But the tea this time was warm. She had made it in the 2 minutes before Jai-ho's footsteps reached the landing, wanting to appear composed, wanting to have something ready. Even now, even tonight. The particular love of a woman who expresses everything through the small preparations she makes for the people she cannot stop trying to protect. Jai-ho set her bag on the counter, sat down. He sent something through the restaurant, she said. Her voice was clear, level. pitched for any microphone that might be living in the walls of this apartment that had, for 3 months, belonged to a man who built his threats into infrastructure. A financial document looks like a co-directorship filing from Busan Capital. I think you should have a lawyer review it before you sign anything. I'm not comfortable with you putting your name on anything from his company without proper legal counsel. Her mother looked at her across the table, held her gaze, understood everything that was underneath the surface of those words. The performance, the reason for it, the invisible audience, the 2 more days that needed to pass before any of this could be spoken plainly. She picked up her cup, sipped. "You're right," her mother said. "We shouldn't sign anything without legal review. I'll call a lawyer on Friday morning." Friday, not tomorrow. Friday, the word landing like a marker, like an acknowledgement between them that Friday was when things changed. That Friday was the finish line they were both walking toward in the dark. Jai-ho reached into her pocket, placed the second clean phone on the table between them. She said nothing. Her mother looked at it, looked at Jai-ho, understood. She picked it up, put it in her cardigan pocket. Jai-ho made tea. She put it in front of her mother without speaking, and her mother wrapped both hands around it, and they sat together in the warm kitchen while the city moved through its evening outside the window. They didn't talk about any of it. They talked about small things: a customer who had complained about the soup base, a crack in the ceiling above the walk-in that needed attention, whether the school up the street was getting louder or whether they were both just sleeping lighter. The ordinary surface of things, maintained with love, which was the only material it had ever been built from. At 11:20, the black phone vibrated. "Go to the living room window. Don't turn the light on." Jai-ho went. She stood at the edge of the glass in the dark, her mother appearing silently in the doorway behind her, drawn by the change in the room. Below, the street was quiet. The black car that had been parked 40 meters down since 8 o'clock sat at the curb with its engine idling, exhaust rising in the cold air. Jai-ho had noticed it when she came home and said nothing. She noted it now, the position, the angle. The driver's silhouette visible through the rear windscreen. Then 2 men appeared from opposite ends of the street. They moved with the unhurried precision of people who have rehearsed this so many times the choreography has become invisible. No urgency. No theater. They converged on the car from both sides simultaneously with the calm economy of people doing something that has already been decided. That is not a confrontation because the outcome has never been in question. The car didn't move. Jai-ho's hand found the window frame. After 30 seconds, the car still hadn't moved. One of the men made a single small gesture, compact, economical, the gesture of someone closing a door rather than forcing one. The car's hazard lights came on once, went off. Then the car pulled from the curb and drove to the end of the street and turned left. And was gone. Her mother made a small sound behind her. Not fear. Something older and more complicated than fear. The sound of a woman watching the walls of something come down that she has been living inside for a very long time. The black phone rang. "The surveillance detail has been removed," Seo Jun said. His voice was quiet, even. "They won't be reassigned." Jai-ho understood the weight in those 4 words, without needing the details behind them. "Desong Capital," she said. The fraudulent incorporation filings were submitted to the Financial Crimes Authority at 9:47 this evening by 2 independent forensic accountants. The property transfers, the restaurant, the apartment are being reversed as we speak. The debt instrument has been declared void. A pause. The same legal firm Kwon used to build the structure has spent the last 4 hours dismantling it. His own lawyers. His own lawyers, Seo Jun said. Under considerable pressure. Men under considerable pressure make correct decisions. Her mother had moved to stand beside her at the window. Jai-ho could feel her there, the warmth of her, the specific presence of a woman who had stood beside her through every version of difficult and was standing here now, watching an empty street where a car used to be. "Tuesday," Jai-ho said, "the infusion. Filed directly with the clinic at 9:15 this evening under a new guarantor. Your mother will receive written confirmation in the morning. She will never need to deal with that name again." A pause. I want to make sure you heard that clearly. Jae-ho looked at her mother. Her mother was watching the empty street with her hands folded in front of her, and her expression carrying something Jae-ho didn't have a word for. Not relief exactly, not joy exactly, but the specific quality of a person who has been walking for a very long time in the wrong direction and has finally, at great cost, turned around. She heard it, Jae-ho said quietly. And Kwon himself. Seo Jun's voice was measured, each word placed with deliberate care. He made a decision 4 years ago to rebuild his position using the people I care about as his architecture. He spent 18 months constructing something designed to make me feel the specific helplessness of a man whose power cannot reach the things that matter most to him. A pause, 4 seconds, absolute. He was wrong about what my power could reach, and he was wrong about my willingness to use it. Jae-ho pressed her free hand flat against the cold glass. Is it done? She asked. It is done, he said. The call ended. Jae-ho stood at the dark window with the phone in her hand and looked at the empty street and waited to feel something equal to the size of what had just happened. What she felt instead was the enormous, structural exhaustion of a person who has been holding tension for so long that its release doesn't feel like relief, but like the sudden awareness of how much the holding had cost. Her hands, steady through every hour of the day through sheer deliberate force, allowed themselves to tremble slightly. She let them. Her mother put an arm around her shoulders. They stood at the window together, the two of them, in the dark living room above the restaurant that had been her grandfather's and her mother's, and was now, on paper and in truth, theirs again. The city moved below them, indifferent and continuous and entirely unaware of the size of what had just shifted inside this small apartment on this ordinary street. After a long time, her mother said, very quietly, he kept his word. Yes, Jae-ho said. He always kept his word, her mother said. That was never the problem. A pause. The problem was that he loved at a distance and called it protection and didn't understand until too late that distance is just another word for absence. She was quiet for a moment. Don't let him make that mistake again. Jae-ho looked at her mother. At the woman who had raised her alone in a restaurant kitchen, who had said nothing to know so many times that the silence had almost become permanent, who was standing here now with her arm around her daughter's shoulders watching the city, and saying the thing she had never said in 23 years with the plainness of a woman who has run out of reasons to keep it internal. I won't, Jae-ho said. She slept. Deeply, without interruption. The sleep of a person who has been carrying something enormous and has finally, legitimately, been allowed to set it down. 3 days later, a letter arrived from a law firm she had never heard of. 2 pages, dense with language she read 3 times before the meaning assembled itself clearly. The restaurant property, transferred 6 months ago to Desong Capital Holdings, had been voided on the grounds of fraudulent incorporation. The debt instrument was unenforceable. The apartment transfer had been similarly invalidated. Attached was a clean title deed. Her grandfather's building, on the street where she had grown up, where she had learned to fold napkins into precise points that only he had ever noticed. Her mother read the letter at the kitchen table. Once, slowly, with both hands flat on the paper. Then she sat very still for a long time. Jae-ho made tea. She put it in front of her mother and sat down and waited. Her mother looked up. Her eyes were bright, not crying, or not yet, with the brightness of a person who has been braced against a weight for so long that, when it lifts, the body doesn't immediately know what to do with the uprightness. It's ours, her mother said. It was always ours, Jae-ho said. Now it says so on paper. Her mother laughed, short and sudden and completely real, the laugh from the photograph, Jae-ho thought. The same laugh. 3 decades older and still entirely itself, still carrying all the warmth of the woman who had stood outside a new restaurant on opening day holding a baby she intended to protect from everything. She covered her mouth. Her shoulders shook once. Then she straightened, picked up her tea. 1 week later, Jae-ho met Seo Jun at the Han River. Her choice. She chose it because it was open and honest, and there were no walls between them, no table, no envelope, no crisis assembling itself around them. She wanted to see what he looked like in ordinary daylight with nothing to manage and nowhere to be except here. He arrived exactly on time. Dark coat, hands in his pockets. He stood at the railing and looked at the water, and she stopped beside him, and neither of them spoke immediately. The river moved below them. Behind them, the city breathed through its Sunday afternoon. The light was thin and pale, and the specific quality of late autumn light that makes everything look simultaneously ordinary and important. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Yes." "The first night, you sat in my section for 40 minutes before you called me to the table." She kept her eyes on the water. "What were you doing for 40 minutes? Seo Jun was quiet for a moment. "I had spent 3 years finding you," he said. "I had a name and a face and an address. I knew your shifts, your routine, what you ordered when you ate alone, what your mother's specialist had said at her last consultation." A pause. "I knew everything about you that intelligence and surveillance could produce. And none of it had told me who you were." He turned to look at her. "I sat in your section for 40 minutes because I needed to see you move through a room, to see what you noticed, how you handled difficulty." He stopped. "What else?" Jaiho said, not a question. "I needed to know whether you were someone I deserved to find," he said quietly. "After 30 years of being the absence at the center of your life, after every decision I made that I told myself was protection, and that was, in truth, also convenience, also fear." He held her gaze. "I needed to know if you were someone worth the cost of finding, and then I needed to know if I was someone worth the cost of being found by." Jaiho looked at him. At the face she had been learning, the language of compression and restraint, of love expressed in the spaces between sentences. "What did you decide?" she asked. "You dropped a spoon," he said, "and then you picked it up without breaking stride and kept moving." A pause. "And I thought she got that from her mother, that specific refusal to let difficulty be the last word." Another pause, shorter. "And then I thought, I have wasted 30 years. I would very much like to not waste another day." Jaiho felt the prickle behind her eyes that meant something was happening in her chest that she hadn't given permission for. She breathed through it, looked back at the river. They stood in silence for a moment. The water moved below them, carrying everything past, the distance, the years, the decades of silence, and continued on without holding any of it. "There's a dinner," Seo Jun said. "Next Friday, business unavoidable. I'd like you to come." Jaiho looked at him. "As what?" He turned to face her. And in the thin afternoon light, with the river moving and the city breathing and 30 years of distance finally, irrevocably closed between them. "As my daughter," he said. The words landed the way things land when they have been waiting a very long time to be set down. Not heavily, the opposite of heavily. The way something lands when it is exactly the right weight for the hands that are finally holding it. Final and beginning simultaneously. The sentence that closes one story and is the very first line of another. Jaiho looked at this man. This careful, precise, dangerous man who had sat in her restaurant for 40 minutes deciding if he deserved her. Who had spent 3 years looking for the right words. Who expressed 30 years of absence in a sentence about a dropped spoon. Who loved, her mother had told her, in ways that didn't look like the word. She looked at him and she thought about a photograph at the edge of a frame. A man half cut away who couldn't, finally, be entirely removed. About a mother who had made warm tea in the 2 minutes before her daughter arrived home. About a restaurant that smelled like her grandfather. About the specific, irreducible fact of being seen, really seen, by the one person whose seeing had been missing her entire life. She thought about 30 years of distance. She was done with distance. "Okay," she said. One word, carrying everything it had ever needed to carry. Seo Jun turned back to the water, but something had shifted in the way he was standing, a fractional, barely perceptible release. The loosening of something held for a very long time by a man who had not allowed himself to put it down until this moment. Until this word. Until this daughter, beside him at a railing, choosing presence over the distance that had been chosen for her before she was old enough to choose anything at all. The city moved around them, ordinary, continuous, completely unaware. Jaiho looked at the river and felt, for the first time in as long as she could remember, that the most dangerous man she had ever met was also the safest place she had ever stood. Not because he had removed every threat, not because the world had become simple, but because he was standing beside her in it, finally, irrevocably, without distance. She had spent 23 years living at the edge of a truth she was never allowed to know. She was done with edges. She was done with distance. She was home. She was safest the moment the most dangerous man finally called her his.